one data model has a relationship to another data model. So in the same way, one object can have a relationship with another object. So a chef is tied to a recipe in the sense that they can post a recipe. A recipe is tied to an ingredient in the sense that it can contain multiple ingredients. So that's the nature of relationships. And if you think of it, that's how people look at things in the world. So if maybe it's a vehicle, it has wheels, like, so an object, a parent has children. So that's the major way relationships happen between objects in the world and between objects in a system. And this aligns with the way people look at things with the world and therefore aligns with people's mental models. So the next thing is a call to action. I want you to think of a call to action as a button. So it's as simple as that, a button. So if this object exists in the world, what button could accompany it? So let's say in our app, a chef could have a call to action for maybe following a chef. So you could follow a chef. So if you're designing a screen that has a chef's profile, it has to have a follow button. So it's a call to action in the sense that there's a purpose for which that object exists, and the call to action fulfills that purpose. So you can follow a chef so that you can see their content. So again, it takes some getting used to, but it shouldn't intimidate you. With practice, you'll get it. Like, it will come naturally to you. So I've been doing it for quite a while, so that's why it seems like it's kind of intuitive, but it will come to you. Then there are the attributes. The attributes are you could say, the characteristics of an object. So an ingredient could have a name, let's say something like rosemary, and the quantity and the unit of measurement, and the dietary information like caloric intake or something like that. So it's just now you're going deeper. You're not just defining an object, you're defining what makes up an object. If it's a chef, they have a name. Maybe in your system, they could have a badge that verifies them. If it's a recipe, it has a name, it has maybe a video, it has instruction, it has servings. So you're just going now deeper and deeper, depending on the information that you've collected, and trying to create a picture of what an object is. Then the next bit I want to go to now. Okay, before I continue, are there any questions so far? Because I think it's a bit technical, and I could take a question or two before I continue to the actual practical case study.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so for object-oriented UX and the kawaida UX usually have for human-centered UX. So for this, we are focusing more on the objects and the relationship between the objects. But my question comes in, how do you adapt this model? Like, for product designers, you're told to focus on the user, but then here we are more like, do I validate my reason as the object, or do I validate my reason as the user?
So first of all, I want to give a disclaimer in the sense that this can't happen without you having gone into the field or having gone into a user's context and have understood how they live, then having gathered information there, and then having decided, okay, I will use this data to solve this problem in this way. So now let me design a solution for them. So this now helps you break down what you have gathered, then break it into a comprehensive thing that you can use to build or design an app. But in this presentation, I will actually show you how you come from an object, you map out all this, then you create an app or a UI out of it. And now you'll see how it actually like builds up into a bigger picture. So I hope I'll have gotten to answer that by the end of the presentation. So I see Michelle asking, how different is this from journey mapping? So if you think of journey mapping in the sense that it's always more of a path towards a goal or towards an outcome. So if I want to create a journey map for maybe getting out of the house in the morning, so my journey map would involve tasks like getting out of bed and maybe showering, maybe taking breakfast, maybe dressing up, and maybe putting on my shoes and like locking the door and getting into the car, and like I've gotten out of the house to go to work. So that's a journey map. But now object-oriented UX now will drill deeper and try to maybe derive what exact data will be involved in each step of that process. So they can complement one another. It's not that you have to ditch one for the other. So they can always complement one another. But again, I hope I'll have answered this question more deeply and clearly when I'm done with the presentation. So if there is no pressing question, I would like to continue. Unless there is a pressing question, I can take one more. Okay. So let me continue. So I have a hypothetical case study here. It's actually a bit of an AI-generated case study, but I try to make it as simple and relatable as possible. So ideally, have a case study that would help you design an app that helps you find recipes easily. And the way you find them is chefs post these apps. I obviously had a batch in mind when I was designing this, but yeah. So you can go into the app, you can find a recipe, and you can maybe check out those ingredients in that recipe. You can try it out. You can also add it to a meal plan, and you can use that meal plan to generate a shopping list. And it has a social element into it. You can share those recipes. You can follow your friends and have them follow you, and you can follow chefs, and you can save recipes by adding them into your collections. So I created this case study to help illustrate how you would approach such a hypothetical scenario with OOUX. And hopefully that could translate into a more practical scenario where you have a real world problem and you want to solve it using OOUX. So the first step, if you want to solve this case study, again, is to identify the objects. So let me move to the next screen. So you don't have to dwell too much on understanding this case study to reveal itself as we continue. So you can think of it, you can think of the first step of identifying the object as looking for things in this system that have attributes and can be instantiated. So by that, I mean, they are repetitive, like you can have multiple ingredients, you can have multiple recipes, you can have a user profile, it has structure, it has properties. So that's how you identify them. But even more than that, if you sit down and try to describe this system and you write a good doc about it, you'll start picking out the nouns and the noun phrases. You will find that you will have a rough idea of what the objects are, but I'll also share resources as to how you can go deeper into learning how to identify objects in a system. But if you have a technical background in IT, it can be relatively easier to identify them. So our system, this hypothetical system, has this object. It has an ingredient. It has a recipe, which is made up of multiple ingredients. It has a user profile, which is now ideally, let's say someone like me, creating an account. So there's a bit of interplay when you're dealing with roles in OOUX. So you can find that a chef is also a user profile, and but they have different roles. So we tend to treat them as independent entities so that we can be able to design for them in a better way as compared to like putting them under one umbrella. But that said, there's also a meal plan. There's now a chef said, there's a shopping list that comes out of maybe generating things to buy from a meal plan. There's a collection where people can save their recipes. There's a rating which accompanies a recipe, and there is a comment which also accompanies a rating. So, and sometimes when you're beginning, it can be difficult to try and think, okay, why does rating have its own object, or why does a comment have its own object and is not like ideally a serious part of this system? But it's important because when you're building or designing the relationships in this system, you find that if you get to design a rating, it also has its own attributes. It has maybe the level, maybe it was 5 stars or 4 stars. Maybe the time it was made, maybe it's also related to who made it. So you find that it's better to have it independently as compared to nesting it as under another object. Yeah. So again, don't worry too much about getting this right in this, or like trying to understand it deeply in this instance. My goal is to just like give you an overview of how this process works. Then if you find it useful, then you can can hopefully get you more interested in trying it out and putting it into work when you're approaching design projects. So the next step is, okay, before I go on, there's something that usually happens here when you're trying to identify objects. You find that there are things that perform similar functions, and there are some objects that, when not properly clearly documented, there can be duplicates, there can be things that perform similar functions. So sometimes you have to either align them under one object or get rid of one and deal on focus on another, depending on the scope and how important that bit is in your system. But to continue, once you have this object in place, you can start thinking about the relationship between the objects. And so the next part is looking at the relationships. So there are 4 kinds of relationships. There are 4 kinds of ways that an object could relate to another object. So there's a one-to-one relationship where one object can only have one relationship with another child. So for instance, in this app, one chef, a recipe will always originate from a single chef. So we have not designed for a case where 2 chefs could collaborate on a recipe. So a recipe in this instance will always originate from one chef. So that is a one-to-one relationship. Then there is a 0-to-1 relationship. Again, these things can be a bit hard to grasp. Sometimes even I find myself coming to refer to them, but once you have an understanding of this, you start thinking of which object will have nested data. Like for instance, if you have objects with 0-to-many or 1-to-many relationships, you can start thinking of, let's say, for instance, in a 0-to-many context where a chef may have 0 recipes. They could not have posted a recipe, but they can also have as many recipes as they want. So when you're designing that screen now, you see it in the sense that there's a list there, and there's a list that can show multiple items. Yeah. So, but I'll get to show you how these relationships can be connected between objects. So there's the 1-to-many relationships where you have to have at least one relationship with a child. So like a meal plan cannot exist without at least one single recipe. So you cannot say you have a meal plan if you don't have at least one single recipe nested in that meal plan. So that's an example of a 1-to-many relationship. So 0-to-1 relationships are rare, where a parent can have one child but can also have no child. So I'll not dwell on that one, but it's good to know about it in some context when it appears. Yeah. So now putting this relationship in practice and trying to link the different objects to one another. So I want to move to FigJam in a bit. Let me share that. So I'm in FigJam now. So we have our objects here. So I hope you can all see this. We have the relationships here. I've described those in details in the previous screen. So now, if you try to think about how those objects relate to one another, I've created a kind of matrix where you can try to fill it. And for instance, if you focus on this ingredient column, you see there are some consequential relationships and there are some that are non-consequential. Like you will find no relationship between an ingredient and another ingredient. Like that's not something that needs to be in our system. But you'll find an ingredient has a relationship with the recipe because it will belong to either one recipe or many recipes. So that means the relationship between an ingredient and a recipe is such that a recipe can have multiple ingredients, but that recipe can also belong to, but that ingredient can also belong to other recipes. Then going down further, you find that now, if we get to generate a shopping list, you find that the relationship between an ingredient and a shopping list is such that one shopping list contains multiple ingredients, but it could also contain 0 ingredients. So again, hard to kind of relate when you're beginning.
Hi, Joseph.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, just so people can see what the
Oh, sorry,
presentation
sorry,
is.
sorry.
Can you zoom in or share the picture?
Let me share the picture. I hope you can all see this, but I'll try to scroll column by column. If you can't join me on the fig jam, be easier that way. So let me try now explain that again with the recipes column. So what's the relationship between a recipe and an ingredient? Again, this can be repetitive because now if you think of it, how this would appear on a screen, if you were to click on an ingredient, you could possibly navigate to recipes where that ingredient has been used. If you were to click on a recipe, you should also see ingredients that belong to that recipe. I've shared the link in the chat, the FigJam link. Yeah, so that's why sometimes you have these repetitive relationships, but it's good to identify them so you know which you want to prioritize. Then you can think of the relationship between a recipe and a user, such as like a random user who will like sign up to get an account in the system. They could like that recipe and add it to their favorite. So you can also think about the relationship between a recipe and a chef. So it's posted by a chef. That's a one-to-one relationship. You can also think of the relationship between a recipe and a meal plan. So a meal plan can only have at least one recipe. So
Hi,
that's a
Joseph.
one-to-many. Sorry?
Okay, so once again, could you make the link public so that you don't have people requesting access
Oh,
to the fig jam?
yeah. Okay.
Or you could share your Nini on fig jam so that we can view for those one on their phones and can't access fig jam.
Yeah, I think now it's okay. I think everyone has access now. Okay. Okay. So yeah, you can see those relationships. So if we go down further, you can see a relationship between a recipe and a collection. So I just want to instill the sense that if when you're doing this, you find that sometimes it can be a bit tedious to map out these relationships. So don't expect to do it in like 1 hour, and it's best when you're doing it with a team. And imagine if when you're discussing it with your team, it's best to when you're doing it together, it creates some kind of like a good exercise for the team to bond and to try like and contribute ideas. So people can do it differently. So you could allocate. So sometimes we usually allocate each other a column. So you say like map this out, give them a user column and give another recipe column. Then you look at the thing all together when everyone has done their bit. So you can do it faster that way, as compared to doing it one at a time, which will take longer. It's best to just complete it fast and now discuss the bigger picture and try to like look what you missed or what you could add. Yeah. So I don't want to dwell on the relationships as much because we have a lot more to cover, but I can come back to it in case of any question. So, but the thing I want to emphasize here is you should try to keenly look for the relationships between different objects, because this is what will help you create some kind of navigation in your app. And what do I mean by that? So if you see this next section, so you see all the relationships that are, for instance, mapped out from a recipe. It has ingredients, it has likes from users, it has a single chef, it belongs to a meal plan, it belongs to a collection. So it should be possible for you to click on a recipe, to go to a recipe, find a chef who made that recipe, click on that chef, go to their profile, again, find that they have favorite ingredients, click on that ingredient and maybe like go find it, and then go back and find the recipes that have been made from that ingredient. And this way you can get to tease out how users will navigate your app. So by understanding those relationships, you begin to see the natural way a user will move from one context to another in your app. So this means that for navigation, you won't have to rely on the navigation bar, because you see that happening a lot. You see like people are locked on to go to a particular section, you have to go back home and then navigate to that section again. So how this changes that is, you can now use content as navigation. You don't necessarily have to rely on the navigation bar. And that is the natural way people look at things. So the relationships are the way people look at a path between objects. And that's what this facilitates, the ability for you to maybe, when you're on a certain page, you can go to the next relationship and to the next relationship, and you don't have to rely on one path that's like a fire escape of sorts in your app. So that's one major advantage of this, because people get to navigate, like you get the sense that people start thinking, okay, these things are easy to find, because when I go to a chef and they have ingredients, I can click on an ingredient, I can find recipes that have ingredients, and I don't necessarily have to go to like a whole page that is full of ingredients first so that I can find the chef who likes those ingredients. So things can be done from any point. And there's this app called Family. It's a crypto app, and it's the one that I've found that really does that. And it has a lot, like people love it so much. Okay, beyond the interaction design, because the interaction design in it is also like super fly, but they also do this a lot, and I think that's a good practice, especially when you're designing something that has a lot of either content or a lot of channels that people could navigate from, and you could make their life easier. So once you tease out these relationships that will help people navigate your app, you can, so again, I will not dwell on the entire thing, but you can always look at it. I'll share the links to this. You can always look at it, but this is like one way to map out how users will use your app. The app is called Family for familia. Yeah, Family. So the next step is we had an object. We have identified the relationship between those objects. We have tried to map out a journey or a way a user would navigate through your app using those objects. Now, the third step is trying to understand the attributes that make up an object. And this is pretty straightforward. An ingredient, let's say, for example, has a name, quantity, unit of measurement, dietary information. A recipe has a name, difficulty level, cooking time, instructions, link to video, something like that. So I put link to video here. I was looking at it from perspective of, I don't really want this app to hold a lot of videos. I think the purpose of it is, sorry?
If it's okay, can I just share the picture? Share my screen for the picture.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Or you can do it.
Okay. How do we do that?
Okay, let me just do this quickly. That I'll be discontinuing your screen sharing for the slides.
Okay.
Then you can adopt the FigJam presentation so that you can move along with everyone else.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. So should I share, or will you share your FigJam?
I can't seem to find you. I would have followed you, but let me just share it.
Okay, let me just share the FigJam on my end. Okay, I'm following you. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Okay, just a moment. So you can see me now?
I can see you.
Okay, so let's go. So attributes. So you find that a user has an email, profile picture, username, first name, last name. A chef could have a name, could have a badge. So you get the point. It's just more of trying to look at what makes up an object. So the characteristics of an object. This is ideally the easiest part of it and the most straightforward one. Then, so the last bit, which is actually the most tedious, and it would take you and your team a lot of time, depending on the complexity of the product, is to identify the calls to actions. So the calls to actions, as I said, you can think of them as a button. So what button could exist to support this object? So if you list everything we've gathered so far, if you look at this ingredient column, we have outlined the attributes, we have outlined the relationships so far. So we use this information that we have now to try and think of what could happen, what are the calls to action that could occur for this object, for this ingredient. So there's the basic ones. You create something, you can update it or you can delete it. So again, depending on the complexity of your system, sometimes deletion does not happen so directly. It has to have like some make a checker process, but that's more when it's more sensitive or there's some things that have to be archived. Now that's more into financial services than recipes, but that's just something to note. So when you're creating call to actions, my best way to do it is to look at the relationships here, then to try to understand how these relationships come about. So, like for instance, an ingredient, if you look at this relationship that it belongs to a recipe or to one to many recipes, so you could see that a direct call to action from that is to be able to add it to a recipe. So anytime you design an ingredient component, it should have a way to add it to a recipe. But sometimes you tend to think, okay, if you go to the recipe and you find that the same relationship exists, it has ingredient as well. And you find that there's also an ability to add ingredients to a recipe. So you can always think of it. Now we have at like some kind of repetitive relationship there. So the way to do that, because this is a scenario that comes up so many times when you're using this, is to try and default to the parent side. Here, the parent is the recipe. Like an ingredient can exist, but it can't have any meaning if it does not belong to a recipe. So you can put this relationship or that call to action under a recipe. So you can say, when I go to a recipe, I should be able to click add, and I should be able to now get a list of recipes to choose from. So instead of starting from an ingredient and creating a recipe out of it. But you could also think of it, again, now when we talk about design, the word it depends comes of a lot. So you could also think of it as maybe an interaction where you're selecting multiple ingredients and now batching them to create a recipe, which could also work. So again, as I said, this is where it would take you a lot of time, because as you are trying to create these call to actions, you're also starting to think, how will that interaction look like? And when you discuss things as a team, everyone has an idea of how that should happen. So sometimes it takes some time. So, and my best approach for it is to do the object mapping and the relationships on a different session. Then you dedicate an entire session for calls to actions. But when you're done with it, it should ideally lead you to a place where you have mapped out your system so well that you could end up with a set of components that could form a screen like this. So for instance, we have already defined our ingredient. So you find the ingredient component would look like this. It has a name, it has quantity. So let's say if it's, let's say what sample of an ingredient, it's beef, let's say 1 kg. So quantity is 1, unit of measurement is 1 kg, is kilogram, territory information. So you could add calories for that. Yeah, same. So, but now we had already defined that. We knew it from the beginning that that is how an ingredient looks like. And now we add this more pattern or to accommodate actions. Like, for instance, you want to delete that ingredient. So since it's not as, okay, also you can say that there are some calls to action that you front, like you don't need to hide them because they're used multiple times. So let's say if I were to add a way to favorite this ingredient. So when I'm designing this component, I would ideally include something like a heart here, because that's a more repetitive interaction. then I could hide things like deleting. So you get to, you just like have to think about it. Which one should take priority, or which interaction will take priority over others. So when designing this component, but the beauty of all this is we now know how a component looks like, and we have built it from the ground up. So even when designing a design system, you can design all these components separately, and you're confident that this is what makes up this component without having to guess, okay, this component should look like this. No, we have started from the data from the ground up, and we've now come into the component and even build an interaction into it. So that's how this thing helps you have a true picture of what your system will look like. So again, now when you're bringing them all together, if you look at our recipe object, it has a name. You could add it to a meal plan or to your favorite, to your collection. You could like it or add it to your favorite. You could perform other actions that are not as like directly important as maybe adding it to a meal plan or liking it. You could see the details associated with it. These are the attributes. The chef also, which is part of a relationship. Remember, we said that a recipe is posted by a chef, so you need to see that. And now looking at things from the user's perspective, I think maybe some people prefer chefs who are, maybe if I come here and see Ombachi, I'll be like, okay, well, maybe this is worth trying as compared to seeing another chef. So people need to know this firsthand. See the number of likes. Maybe you could be convinced by, if you see like this, people have liked this recipe so much, you could be convinced to try it out. You could see the number of comments. Then you could possibly create an interaction where now you can expand this and to open up comments, to read the comments, since that's also a component on its own. So like something that comes to mind here is the YouTube comment section, where it's not always directly visible, but you see the number of comments and you can open it and you can start reading the comments, especially on mobile. Then you can see cooking time, you can see the link to a video if someone shared a link to the video on how to make this recipe. So again, it said I am linking a video because I'm looking at it from the perspective of, okay, I don't want this app to store videos. I just want people to just find the recipes for now. Product-wise, there could be an argument for or not for videos, but let's try to narrow things down and simplify them for this scenario. But if you are creating it, I guess someone could argue that, okay, maybe it would be a better product if it had video. But let's just try to keep things simple. Then there's the servings, how many people will actually get, or can this recipe serve? Then there are the elements that make up the recipes. Maybe there's the image, the pictures for, maybe this could be in form of a carousel. I haven't done it enough justice. Maybe if now we go to high fidelity, it would be better. Then there's now the list of ingredients that make up this recipe, and you can see them like in a list form, and you should be able to read them properly. And then there's the instructions. Of course, you told like start here, do this, leave your oven at this temperature. Yeah, there's such things. So, and then again, another example is now when you go to the chef's profile, let's say you click chef here. So you go to the chef's profile and now you find yourself in the chef's profile, and then you can follow them. You can see the number of followers. Yeah. Then you can see the recipes they have posted, and you can now like see how these things are starting to become related, because you could also click on a recipe and open it. So you don't need to navigate in a different way where you just go to a screen where you'll find recipes first. Yeah. And if you're a chef, you could have a button where you upload a recipe, you create a new recipe. So you start thinking of how those relationships come about, and that is how object-oriented UX helps you trying to move from the information that you had about a problem to actually going ahead and even building a prototype, because from here then you can go high fidelity. Yeah. So this is what I ideally wanted to show with this presentation, how you move from data to UI. And again, so I am not saying that we abandon the tools we have. I'm not saying we abandon the user journey maps, because those are also important and they provide clarity in some way. What I'm saying is you have to look at things from, there's system design, there's UX design, and there's UI design. So this is more of system design, where you're thinking, okay, what are the objects here? What are the elements in this system? How are they connected? What is the purpose of each? Then once you get an understanding of that, you can intuitively create any kind of UX you want. And if you approach systems like this, system design like this, there's no system that will ever be so hard for you to solve, because you will always have looked at it from first principles. You always have seen the elements that make it fast. So you will not be looking from the other side. Like sometimes normal people start, okay, the user will start here, they will click this, but you really don't have a clear picture of, or a whole understanding of what is that object that they will click made of and how does it tie to other objects. But when you start with the data, it's a more straightforward path and you get a more clear direction. So that's why I like this process, and I feel like it has worked for me when I'm designing UIs. So I want to go back to the presentation a bit, but I can still talk about it. Let me share my screen again. So I think I've covered some of this when I was explaining, but okay, just to go back and look at, okay, what are the benefits of using object-oriented UX? So you first of all, you have consistent and intuitive interfaces, because users are able to use content to navigate. Users are able to just directly navigate as per their mental model. They don't have trouble finding things. Sometimes it's hard to use an app where you have trouble finding things, and it's a bad experience. Okay, so there are some things that people can live with. When a product is the only product of its kind, it's a kind of monopoly, and it has power in the sense that people cannot abandon it for another product. They can't live with such problems. But let's say when you are an app that is competing in a segment that has also other apps, and you're trying to, when they start like seeing some bit of friction and they start hearing there are better options out there, they will leave. Okay, it's better if they left because of a problem that you could not solve or that was too hard, than them leaving because they could not find things in your app. It's kind of sad. Then the second benefit is it fosters component reusability. So there's the whole idea of atomic design, where you try to like create a small like basic component, then you use it to build up a bigger system. And I feel like this approach of object-oriented UX marries very well with atomic design, and you can use it to build up your design system. Okay, the other thing is the holistic experience. Okay, when you are like designing those relationships and when you're mapping out those call to actions, you find that you will actually end up having a lot of questions where you like start asking, okay, should chefs be able to co-post a recipe? Then that's a problem now that has to be discussed from a product management and product strategy perspective. And now that's a problem that can be discussed. And so it's a good tool to help people really align on those initial things that set direction for a product. And so yes, you could maybe if you are really like a deep thinker, you could maybe find a way to ask those questions even without doing OUX. But I feel like with OUX, you just bump into them. When you're doing this process, questions just start arising, and out of that discussion, it helps create a better product. But it does not help you find product market fit, but it just helps you like align properly and like have better products, so that someone will not come to you like 2 months later when you guys have designed and the devs have built, and they're saying, okay, can chefs maybe share like be able to compose the recipe, and then now you have to now go back to the board. So it helps have some discussions that help to narrow down that complexity upfront. And the beautiful thing about it is there's some part that I was actually from experience. It's one that I did, and I found the dev, a backend dev in the FigJam data. So then they were using all that the OOUX, all that model to design their backend model. So the data structure and the views model, and so they were ideally borrowing from what I had and using it to inform how the API will work and how it will now bring data to the front end. And I think when that goes full circle, it's actually very beautiful because you will be able to have a conversation with them in a way that they understand as well. But you'll now be, of course, advocating it from a user experience point of view, but it will be like you're also meeting them halfway from an OOUX perspective. Then, okay, I've already said this, it reduces ambiguity and it helps you design clear interactions. You know what to click where and what data that will bring up when you click it. So that doesn't need much explanation. So my other slide is more of, okay, what happens? Like, okay, maybe this looks too rosy, but there are challenges also in implementing it. The first challenge is when you're discussing things, especially that's call to actions, mapping out the call to actions, you find people really start getting ideas for features. Okay, like maybe we could do this, like maybe we could do this. Or maybe a chef could be able to schedule a recipe and they could post tomorrow. Or maybe like this should happen in future. So when you start going down those paths, you find that the system becomes complicated and tedious. So you have to always keep it simple. You have to always now, if now like you are the one who has learned object-oriented UX and you've gone to your company and you now want to introduce it there. So and you are moderating that session, your role is to just keep things simple. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to like handle too much at once. Don't add complexity to solve hypothetical future problems. Just deal with today's problems, and the rest will be able to. You can always graft additional features when they are needed because you have already set out the basic model. You can always add to it because it still remains the source of truth. Then, okay, so evangelizing it and getting people to accept it. So the first time I tried it is because I was working in an organization where it was kind of hard to people to agree on what to build, and we needed some clarity. So when I found this, it was pretty. Maybe we could also say in hindsight, you have some confidence, but it's not like real practical confidence. It's just confidence that comes out of, okay, I found this, let's try it and we see how it goes. Yeah. So you can try it, but it helps. It's very good. Like when people really get to see it and it works out and for a project, and it can help you build things very fast. You can move from not understanding things or like fighting about how they should be into really building fast, and that's the beauty of it. But it's also a challenge, so you have to be persuasive. You have to do that work where you could maybe like map out an entire project by yourself, then maybe try to build some support from maybe, okay, of course you start with the design team. The design team is always like willing to listen my perspective. So that's good. But now if you want to now like build the bridge with engineering, so you kind of have to now get a bit political and like try to convince them one by one. So I found that works. But if you can successfully do it, it will bring tremendous improvement into how you guys do things. Okay, so the third one is don't try to build Rome in a day. So don't try to do it all at once. I've made that mistake. I have actually made all the mistakes that I've told you not to. I have expanded the scope to cover future problems when I was starting out. I have at some point it became too big, and you're like, okay, or like sometimes even a dev came to me and told me, okay, yes, it's good that we are discussing this, but we are spending so much time. Okay, what are we doing wrong? So don't try like keep it as simple as possible and don't overwhelm people with a new way of work, but at least keep it practical. Then it does not replace the things we do. Design, like you can't do it without UX research. You can't do it if you don't understand your problem clearly. So it does not replace what we know. It just makes you really good at designing system when you have proper information for it, and it helps you ask the right questions with your stakeholders. Yeah. So that is it for me. I think that was my last slide. Yeah. So thank you for your time. Yeah. I hope you try it out. You can always reach out, and if you have any questions, can always we can always talk, and I'm willing to help, and probably have another session. Yeah. Take any questions you have.
Hi, Margaret. You can speak. I've unmuted you.
Okay. Hi, Joseph. This is a gold mine. I'd like to take you back to, I think it was how it all comes together. Excuse me. There's something you said, and you can add a recipe under ingredient, but you can also add ingredients under a recipe, and you introduce the whole parent-child relationship. So how do you decide who's the parent, who's the child? And then could you just go over how you decide whether you're adding this action will be under ingredient or it would be under the recipe when they become repetitive?
Oh, okay. It's more of contextual in this, but I always prefer to go to the parent, and the parent here would be the recipe, because an ingredient needs to belong to a recipe for it to be useful. Just in the way that, okay, the parent, a child needs a parent to live in some way. If you could think of what's like, if you look at it in the system, you and you try to envision it. Okay, let's say we have both call to actions. We have the ability to create a recipe from an ingredient, or to add a recipe, an ingredient to a recipe. So, and if you think of how that journey should happen, if the journey is adding an ingredient to a recipe, does a user start to by going to create a recipe, then adding ingredients, or does a user go to ingredients and select ingredients and add them to a recipe? So it also depends on the experience you want to build, but there are some that are very straightforward, like for a chef and recipe. So of course, you know that it's that recipe is nested under a chef. You cannot go to a recipe and click and find chefs, because that's like the relationship. The parent there is the chef who creates multiple recipes. So some are straightforward, some are not, but it's important to just think of it from, like, when you think of how that journey would happen, the journey is adding an ingredient to a recipe. So how will that journey occur? How will that outcome be achieved? It can be achieved by going and finding ingredients, then selecting them, then batching them all, and then forming a recipe out of them, which feels kind of tedious. Or you can go and start, okay, decide, okay, I want to create a recipe. You give that recipe a name, you give all, like you give it some attributes. Then when you come to adding ingredient, you click on add ingredients, and you get a list of ingredients, and then you select them, and then you save, and there you have your recipe. So you just have to like have a feel of, now that's why I said we can't abandon user experience or user journey mapping, because now you have to like have a feel of which one is more intuitive or which one would make more sense. Yeah, hope I have answered you.
Yes, you have. Thank you for that. I have like 2 more questions.
Okay.
That's a host. Yeah. So at what point do you, in this whole process, do you bring in engineers? Yes. And yeah.
So it depends. If let's say you will have a good design team and they understand this, and you can map things out you can map things out together, I think it's good to keep the number low. Like if you should at least ideally aim for at least like not more than 5. because the more the people, the more the discussion. The more the discussion, the more time it takes. The more time it takes because people have different ideas and you find that you will overextend yourselves. But if you can do it in a small team, then once you have those results, then invite the devs, okay, and tell them, okay, here's what like we mapped out this system to look like. Okay, what do you guys think of this? Then you try to walk them through it, and then you will actually automatically see them. It's like taking some cows to pasture, and you see them how they start telling, okay, why is that relationship like that? Then they start even asking questions because like they get it. So I would suggest you, first of all, if you have a design team, you do it with your team. If you're a solo designer, try AI. It really works. Well, it actually understands these concepts properly. If you like can write a good prompt, it can work, and you can still make your case with by sparring with the AI, and it will like help you create a simple draft that you can then now go and have a proper discussion with your devs.
Okay. Our final question is, when you're mapping out objects, now, if you're doing this for the first time, it can be really difficult to differentiate between an object and an instance. So I don't know whether there are any tips or how you know this is now actually the right object, and I can proceed from there.
It's more of practice, but also there's some bit I left out. There's some exercises that, okay, called like noun foraging, but I'll share the resources for that, which is a stage of by itself for identifying objects, and you can get them from anywhere, but it helps to just like outline a doc and try to describe that system in detail, then try to like start looking out for nouns, okay, the things that are creating like a story that is supported by other things. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. This was really insightful.
Yeah. Oh, I see a question on chat. Kindly elaborate on how OUX can be used to create a design system. So yeah, when you have an object and you have defined its attributes, and you have defined its calls to action, we have our ingredient there. We can see it has a unit of measurement, a name, and some things that could happen to it. So you can design that component. And now, as your system grows, it grows into a set of components. So, and that set of components can belong to a certain module or feature. So that's how you can grow it. And okay, there's always this. I saw this tweet the other day that you should not rush to create a design system when you're starting out a project. Okay, you can't say, okay, I'm designing this new app. Okay, now I'm gonna design a design system for it. You should actually get to a point where you see that there are components that are repeating, then try to standardize them. But this helps you get them out pretty early, and you can now start standardizing things properly because you know what that object will look like. So it's just a matter of curating it properly because you have true objects as compared to doing some maybe guesswork and trying to, okay, maybe this object should look this way. Like you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. But with this one, you can approach them from an atomic design perspective where you can create a small object, then decide how that object fits into a certain module, then grow it and like curate them properly. Yeah. I don't know whether there's another question. I have like 17 minutes. If there's no question, I can end the session.
I had one question.
Okay.
I had to miss a lot of the presentation. Oh, it's being live streamed. Ignore me.
Yeah.
There'll be a recording, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can find it on YouTube at OOUX Nairobi. That's where you can read.
You can reach me on Twitter at another Mugo, and another for like another, like another Mugo. You'll want to search that, or you can like, I think I'm also on WhatsApp or on LinkedIn. I had shared, let me try share my details again.
Thank you.
So you can find me on Twitter at another Mugo. It's on chat. Okay. So thank you for your time, guys, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. And if you have anything, just reach out and we can talk. So back to you, Lynette.
Oh, thank you, Joseph, for taking us through this session. It has been insightful. Honestly, I'm just like noting down things and objects and attributes and how to build out that. Thank you for the amazing people who have managed to join us today. We have live streamed this on YouTube, so you can find the recording and go through everything on YouTube at OOUX Nairobi. We host monthly meetups every fourth Tuesday of the month, with an exception of July this month. So you can find our future events on our socials. We'll be sharing that on our socials. Also, you can find recordings of our past events on YouTube too. And yeah, it's been really great to have you all. Yeah, we also appreciate feedback on the conduct of our events. So you can reach us on socials with your feedback and also on topics that you'd like us to cover. I think that's it from us for this month. And yeah, it was amazing having you all. We would also like to note that we'll not be sharing our monthly newsletter this month because of restructuring. So we'll be able to get opportunities, job opportunities from next month's newsletter. And we apologize for the inconvenience that this causes, but we hope that you understand. Without any further ado, I'd just like to dismiss our meeting for today with 14 minutes left to the hour. Have a wonderful August and keep warm. I know it's cold in Nairobi. So yeah, it was nice having you all. Bye.